Junkies on 106.7 The Fan. It's Cakes, EB, and JP. Coming up at 8 o'clock. Want to get into some Redskins notes? Couple of defensive coordinators that apparently they can't talk to. Another one that they're going to interview. We can get into that. Plus, Kirk Cousins actually made some news.
Well,
so we'll get into that.
He walked it back. Plus, you had the Bruce Allen presser, which was amazing. The thing that's frustrating about that is I don't think anybody saw it. It was only online.
Yeah, I think the amazing thing is he talked about how they're like a winning organization off the field.
Yeah, he talked about his charity wins.
Because that's what really counts, is what happens off the field.
He's been exposed for everyone to see as a complete phony.
Yeah.
A complete
and I don't
phony.
care if he sat down with us for table manners. It's fine.
No, I mean, the truth.
Sat down with us for table manners.
Yeah.
But he's been a flop as a GM for the Redskins.
He's just a empty suit. I think everybody knows that by now.
All right. Of course, yesterday had some playoff games, and the last one was probably the best of the weekend. The Cowboys end up beating Detroit 24-20. Controversial call/non-call in that game. Join us to give us some more insight. Jim Daopoulos, former NFL ref. Hey, Jim.
Morning. How you doing, guys?
Doing all right. So I'm not one of these guys that says there's some sort of conspiracy theory. You got some crazy, wacky listeners of ours that think there's a conspiracy, but kind of explain to us how a flag gets thrown on what everybody thinks is a pass interference. The referee actually calls it a pass interference. Then you hear nothing, and it's a non-call.
It was very confusing to, I'm sure, the players, the coaches, the fans, and I just sat and watched it, and I just couldn't believe it. You know, it was an obvious pass interference. Hitchens not playing the ball, contacts Pettigrew early. It's an easy call, and the back judge made the call. Needed to stick with his conviction, and for some reason was talked out of it by the head linesman. Why the head linesman got involved, you know, it's just one of those situations that there was some miscommunication out there. They didn't do a good job, you know, discussing what was going on. They didn't give the referee the proper information. You know, it was just poorly handled at that point. And why does that have to happen in a playoff game where, you know, you're on the biggest stage of the weekend? So unfortunately, they got it wrong, and to further complicate things, then Des Bryant comes off the bench, and absolutely, that's 15 yards. I mean, there's no question. That's the easiest call in football. That guy comes on the field. As soon as he steps on the field, you know, as a non-player, without a hat, without his helmet on, you flag him. So they dropped the ball on this one.
And, Jim, when they get together and huddle, even if they don't think it's pass interference, shouldn't it at least have been reduced to defensive holding? Because you look at the screenshots, Pettigrew's jersey's getting tugged, and then later, Hitchens has his left arm on Pettigrew's right shoulder. I mean, there are two instances of it.
You have a lot of situations there, but, you know, the whole problem was that, you know, they're not going to reduce the penalty or change the penalty. I mean, it's a penalty. It was a penalty from the time that Hitchens grabbed him, you know, all through the play. And, you know, I don't even think that was brought into the equation. I think the question was the head linesman says, I just don't feel there was enough contact to be pass interference. And the back judge has just got to be strong enough to say, hey, you know what? I made the call and I'm sticking to the call. You know, mark it off, referee, and he just didn't do that, and that was unfortunate because he did make a really good call.
Why no explanation though? What is sort of the rule for that? Because I mean, why would you leave 80,000 fans there, or however many are there, and then the millions watching at home, and give us no explanation? You have to wait until after the game. I mean, it's completely ridiculous.
Yes, you know, and that's the thing that kind of was puzzling to me. I happened to be at the game in Carolina on Saturday night. And Ed Hockley was the referee, and you know, Ed, and that's Ed's forte. Ed's going to give you a full explanation of everything that goes on the field, whereas Pete's a little bit more low key than Ed. So yeah, it's unfortunate because we were all kind of left in the dark. You know, TV was showing the play, so you really didn't hear. You know, I guess something went on in the stadium, but you never heard anything on TV on an explanation. So it was just an unfortunate situation, not very well handled, and something that the league office is going to have to address today.
All right, how do they assign these crews? Because the television broadcasting guys and Mike Pereira, the ex-official, was making a point of it being this crew's first game together. They didn't work together in the regular season. Why not reward the good regular season crews versus put together, you know, like a mix of guys?
Well, you know, we worked with that, you know, and I worked with Mike for years up in New York, and it was one of the sticking points that we had with the officials. We talked about sending crews. We talked about sending individual, so-called all-star crews. I don't ever call them all-star crews. I just call them the individuals that have qualified for the playoffs. And what happens is, the problem is you can send a crew, but sometimes you have members of that crew that don't qualify. They don't make the grade, whether they haven't scored high enough, whether they've had bad years, or whether they're just, too young and they're not, the first couple of years they're not allowed to go to the playoffs. So there were some issues with that. My feeling is these officials have been officiating, major college football and National Football League games for over 20 years, every one of these guys that were out on the field. And if they're not able to mesh as a group and work together, it's not rocket science out there. These guys should be able to do it. And, it's just a communication situation, and it was poorly done. But I don't think if there was a crew, it would have been any different yesterday.
Talking to Jim Daopoulos, former NFL ref. Let me ask you about kind of the philosophy of less calls in big games. Is that something that referees talk about, that you don't want referees deciding the outcome of big games?
Well, you don't want referees deciding the outcome of any games. Basically, they're out there to just enforce the rules. But I can tell you, in my 25-odd years with the National Football League, never, ever have we gone into a game and told the officials, no, we don't want too many flags, or we want more flags, or keep an eye on this crew, or, make them a little bit tighter. You go out there without a mindset. You know what the rules are. You're taught what to officiate, how to officiate, and, essentially you're supposed to call the game, the first preseason game, the same as you call the Super Bowl. Doesn't always work that way. You try to be consistent in what you're doing throughout the year, but you don't change how you call the game during the playoffs. Players play a little bit better because it's a bigger game during the playoffs, but officials should not be changing the way they officiate during the playoffs.
You mentioned Dez going out there, and to all of us, that seemed like an obvious penalty. They don't call that either. All I could think of is, well, maybe that just happens way more than the cameras capture. Or is that really as egregious and as obvious and as rare as it seemed to be as a viewer?
In my opinion, that was the most egregious play of the day right there.
Wow.
And for the officials to miss that, I am more frustrated with them not calling a penalty on Dez Bryant than having the situation, picking up that flag. They pick up flags all the time. Officials have different views of pass interference. One guy sees it one way, and it happens all the time. But when a player comes out on the field, that's a no-brainer. That has to be called, and I'm frustrated that they didn't call that. That would have offset any mistake that they had made by picking up the flag. It should have been a penalty on Dez Bryant.
I want to kind of fast forward to the Baltimore-New England game, because I know New England has corners that can get physical at times. And we saw in the Detroit Cowboys game a couple of defensive holding calls. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, but about referees deciding the outcome. But do you expect them to throw the flag a lot if there's contact downfield on the Ravens receivers?
Honestly, I would expect them to be consistent in what they've been calling all year. I haven't been really happy with what's been going on downfield, but that's irrelevant right now, because the competition committee in the league has said we want to let those receivers run free this year. We're going to call them a little bit tighter. So the officials have been charged with tightening up the calls downfield. Now, I would hope that they will be consistent in what they've been doing all year in the Baltimore-New England game. And I don't know, they haven't assigned the officials for that game yet, but I would hope that they would put some of their stronger officials, in that game, especially the downfield officials that are going to be covering the wide receivers and the defensive backs.
Part of the problem, Jim, as a viewer, when you're watching this and you feel so helpless, is, a lot of these plays aren't reviewable, and it's very hard to distinguish what's reviewable and what's not. I mean, we could sort of memorize it, but to understand the rationale behind it is difficult. Is there any way we can get to a point where virtually everything is reviewable, so that when it's a missed obvious call like that, you could throw the flag and review it and get it correct?
Well, certainly you could review every play, but gosh, we would lose the interest of the fans. It would lose the interest of the players.
Well, no, still have a limited number of challenges. Not asking you to review every play, but just give the opportunity for certain plays that aren't reviewable to actually be reviewed. Do you know what I mean?
I have been an advocate of reviewing personal fouls now for a number of years. We put the onus on these officials to call hits on defenseless receivers, and whether they hit them in the neck or head area, whether they hit them with the crown or the hairline or the face mask, and they're making these calls at 100 miles an hour, and we don't give them the opportunity to look at it like they do in college. They should open up their replay review system. They let them look at whether the 12th man's foot's on the line trying to get out of bounds. You can review that, but you can't review a 15-yard personal foul. So they've got to look at that, and I would hope that they would look at that in the off season.
What do you make of the story of the NFL VP of officiating being on the Dallas Cowboys party bus?
I think it's a non-story. It was something that happened last year. I think deemed didn't use very good judgment, but I think it was addressed. But I think it's a non-story.
I mean, who doesn't want to be on a party bus? That sounds like a really good time.
They're always good.
Especially the Dallas Cowboys party bus.
Yeah.
All right, Jim, appreciate the times. Jim Daopoulos, former NFL ref. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Great being with you guys.
Okay, buddy.
News on the Mitsubishi Electric Heating Hotline.
That's right. Coming up next, we're going to dive into the Redskins. Are they winning the offseason again? Some news. You had Bruce, the GM, talking last week. You've got defensive coordinators in the mix. And has a quarterback demanded a trade? We'll get into all that next on The Fan.